A semi rolls off the interstate and lines up at a diesel island. The driver unlocks the pump, starts fueling, and the numbers climb fast. On August 17, 2026, the U.S. Energy Information Administration reported an average on-highway diesel price of $5.45.4 per gallon. That is a current retail benchmark, not a claim about the contract price paid by every fleet. If our truck bought an illustrative 100 gallons at that benchmark, the receipt would be about $545. That looks like an extraordinary retail transaction. But the first mistake we could make as the owner is to confuse the size of the receipt with the value of the sale. The fuel itself cost money. The price includes taxes. Commercial customers may not even be paying the number posted on the roadside sign because large fleets negotiate pricing and rebates. Payment systems cost money. The property costs money. The employees standing here at 2 in the morning cost money, and the asphalt under the truck is slowly being worn out by the machine that is generating our revenue. So the interesting question is not how much money crossed the pump, it is how much economic value stayed with us. Now the driver pulls forward. The truck leaves the fuel island, but it does not leave the property. The driver walks inside. Maybe there is coffee, maybe dinner, maybe a shower, maybe a reserved parking space, maybe the truck needs a tire, an inspection, or a scale ticket. By morning, the same customer can interact with several businesses sitting on the same piece of land, and that creates a strange possibility. The $500 receipt might be the largest transaction of the visit without being the transaction we care about most. If we wanted to buy this truck stop, build it, operate it for a year, and then open the bank account, what would actually determine whether this was a good investment? First, we have to understand what we are buying. A neighborhood gas station is usually a retail box attached to fuel pumps. A serious truck-focused travel center is closer to a small roadside logistics campus. Travel Centers of America gave us a useful historical benchmark before it was acquired by BP. In its 2022 annual filing, TA described a typical TA or Petro travel center as occupying more than 24 acres, with parking for roughly 200 tractor-trailers and about 100 cars, plus restaurants, a store, multiple fueling points, and a truck repair facility. That is not a national average. It is one company's description of its own typical large-format locations, but it tells us the scale of the physical problem. A tractor-trailer needs wide entrances, turning room, and separate circulation. Diesel islands need high-throughput fueling equipment. There may be underground tanks, diesel exhaust fluid systems, food operations, showers, repair bays, drainage, lighting, truck parking, car parking, delivery access, and space for vehicles that can be 70 feet long. The owner is therefore not merely buying a store. The owner is buying a choreography problem. Trucks have to enter without blocking cars. Fuel deliveries have to reach the tanks. A broken-down tractor cannot trap the diesel lanes. A driver looking for overnight parking should not have to circle through the retail entrance. The repair shop needs access that does not turn the rest of the site into a queue, and every square foot has to be in roughly the right place. A beautiful store with a terrible truck entrance is not a beautiful business. Construction cost is just as dangerous to generalize. A Texas public project filing in 2025 listed an estimated $20 million cost for one new Love's project in Belton, with an 11,863 square foot travel stop building and associated fueling and parking. That does not mean a truck stop costs $20 million. It means one specific project had that reported budget and scope. A site with cheaper land can still require expensive utility work. A site with a smaller building can require enormous paving. A site with existing fuel infrastructure can be cheaper to acquire but carry environmental history that a greenfield project does not. A property with sewer access is a different development problem from one that needs a more complicated wastewater solution. Our job is not to invent an industry average from one permit. Our job is to build a transparent, representative site, state every assumption, and then test how sensitive the investment is to the price we paid for the property. Because before we sell 1 gallon, the balance sheet is already enormous. The next thing we buy is an exit, not traffic in the abstract, usable truck traffic. A parcel can be physically beside an interstate and still be a poor truck stop site. A truck may have to cross traffic. The turning geometry may be awkward. The entrance may be easy from one direction and irritating from the other. A nearby interchange may already have a strong competitor. The road serving the site may be technically accessible, but operationally unpleasant for a loaded tractor-trailer. For a passenger car, an inconvenient turn is annoying. For a commercial driver managing time, equipment, and a legal driving clock, inconvenience is part of the price. That means an owner evaluating a parcel should not ask only how many vehicles pass the interchange. We should ask which of those vehicles are trucks, whether they can reach us safely, whether they can re-enter the highway easily, what competing facilities sit before and after our exit, and whether the site is positioned where drivers naturally need to stop rather than merely where land happened to be available. Traffic count is a demand clue. Access converts that demand into a customer. Iowa 80 is useful here, not because we know its private profitability, but because we can see what a strategic location can become over time. The official history says Iowa 80 opened in 1964 and today offers 900 tractor-trailer parking spaces. The property kept expanding as traffic and services accumulated around the location. Then there is a second clue. Iowa 80 says its fuel center became a Truck Stops of America franchisee in 1992, while the broader operation remained independently owned. That is an interesting business structure. A family-owned property could retain its identity while connecting part of the operation to a national fuel network. Location created the opportunity. Network access could help monetize it. But location has another quality that is easy to miss. It can compound. If a site becomes known for reliable parking, clean facilities, fast fueling, and useful services, drivers and fleets have reasons to return. More traffic can justify more services. More services can make the stop more useful. That usefulness can reinforce traffic. That compounding can work in reverse, too. A poorly maintained lot makes drivers avoid the site. Lower traffic makes it harder to justify reinvestment. Deferred maintenance makes the experience worse. A truck stop can lose relevance, one broken shower, one unreliable pump, and one pothole at a time. A great exit is not automatically a great investment. You can still overpay for the land, borrow too much money, run the store badly, or neglect the pavement. But a bad exit is difficult to fix with good coffee, so our representative business begins with a physical moat, convenient access to a freight corridor. Now we can finally look at the transaction that makes the roadside sign so impressive. Here is the accounting distinction that controls the entire episode. Fuel revenue is not fuel gross profit. Fuel gross profit is not operating profit. Operating profit is not owner cash flow. And owner cash flow is not the same thing as return on the capital we had to invest. Travel Centers of America gives us an unusually clear historical example. In 2022, the company reported about $8.7 billion of fuel revenue and about $570 million of fuel gross margin. It also reported roughly $2.1 billion of non-fuel revenue and about $1.3 billion of non-fuel gross margin. The fuel line was enormous. The gross profit dollars told a different story. TA also reported about 2.28 billion gallons sold that year. Divide the reported fuel gross margin by those gallons, and you get roughly 25 cents per gallon for that particular company in that particular year. That is not what truck stops make per gallon. It is one historical gross margin result before site operating expenses, corporate costs, rent, depreciation, interest, and taxes. Earlier TA filings make clear that fuel gross margin per gallon can move with market conditions and pricing lags. The number is not a constant of nature. This is where generic explanations often go wrong. They search for one magical cents per gallon number and then treat it as if every independent truck stop, every national chain, every market, and every fleet contract work the same way. An owner cannot underwrite a property that way. If our modeled site sells 10 million gallons, a difference of just a few cents of gross margin per gallon changes annual gross profit by hundreds of thousands of dollars. That change can be the difference between covering normalized maintenance capital and postponing it. It can be the difference between making a debt payment comfortably and watching cash disappear during a weak quarter. The roadside price creates another illusion. TA disclosed that approximately 90.6% of its diesel volume in 2022 was sold at discounts to posted prices under pricing and rebate arrangements with fleet customers. So, when our driver sees a giant number on the sign, the fleet behind that driver may be operating under a different economic arrangement. That means our opening calculation was intentionally a posted price benchmark, not a claim about what every commercial customer actually pays. Imagine two trucks fueling side by side. To a person walking past the pumps, they appear to be buying the same product at the same place. Economically, one transaction may be governed by a fleet agreement and the other may be closer to retail. The operator cares about gallons, but also about the pricing agreement attached to those gallons. This matters because a truck stop can process spectacular revenue while retaining a relatively narrow economic spread on fuel. A change in wholesale prices can make reported revenue explode or collapse, even if the underlying operating performance has not changed in the same proportion. It can also change the amount of cash needed to keep inventory moving. TA has historically warned that higher fuel prices increase working capital requirements. The same gallons sitting in tanks require more dollars to finance when the commodity becomes more expensive. Suppose nothing about the site improves. The same trucks arrive, the same gallons leave the tanks. The same employees work the same shifts, but the wholesale value of the inventory rises sharply. We now need more money tied up simply to keep doing the same physical job. That is why a fuel retailer can report higher sales and simultaneously feel more financially constrained. So the owner can experience one of the strangest situations in retail. Sales can rise because the product became more expensive, while the business becomes more difficult to finance. The giant receipt is real. It just does not belong entirely to us in the way the top line suggests. Commercial fuel also creates a two-customer problem. The person standing next to the truck cares about clean bathrooms, safe parking, food, a shower, short lines, and getting back on the road. The fleet manager may care about negotiated fuel economics, network coverage, transaction data, fraud controls, reliable pumps, repair access, and whether a driver can complete a stop without wasting an hour. The operator has to satisfy both. That is where network scale becomes important. Pilot said in March 2026 that its network had more than 900 locations across 44 states and 5 Canadian provinces, served about 1.2 million guests per day, and supplied approximately 12 billion gallons of fuel per year. A single independent site cannot offer national coverage like that. A large network can be useful to a fleet precisely because the carrier does not want to renegotiate the fueling process at every exit from California to Ohio. The driver may like a particular independent stop. The fleet may prefer a network where pricing, transaction controls, and reporting are already integrated. The operator therefore competes not just for affection at the counter, but for a place inside the carrier's operating system. But scale does not eliminate the physical bottleneck at the pump. A diesel lane is productive capacity. While a truck occupies it, another truck cannot use the same position. If drivers finish fueling and leave the truck at the pump while they go inside, the next sale waits. If payment authorization fails, the lane waits. If the approach is badly designed, the lane waits. We do not need to invent an industry-wide number for how many trucks one lane processes per hour to understand the economics. The logic is enough. More minutes per transaction means fewer transactions per lane per day. A lane can look busy while producing less throughput than it should. That distinction matters. Occupancy is not productivity. A pump blocked by a truck that finished fueling 10 minutes ago looks utilized from a security camera, but it is not producing another fuel sale. The owner should think about the fuel island the way a restaurant owner thinks about table turns, or a warehouse operator thinks about dock doors. The physical asset earns only when the flow through it is managed. And for the customer, those minutes are not leisure. A commercial vehicle earns by moving freight. Waiting is downtime. That gives us the first version of the deeper product. The travel center is not merely selling fuel. It is trying to compress several necessary tasks into one stop. Fuel the truck, feed the driver, find parking, shower, check the weight, fix a tire, get back to the highway. If those tasks are scattered across different exits, the driver loses time. If they are unreliable at our property, the fleet loses predictability. If we can bundle them efficiently, the property becomes more than a place with pumps. The faster and more reliably the property can do that, the more useful it becomes to both customers, the driver and the fleet. Now the driver walks through the door. This is where the revenue mix changes. In 2022, TA reported a non-fuel gross margin percentage of about 60.4%. Again, that was historical company-wide data, not a promise about our store, and not net profit. But the contrast with fuel is important. A product can produce much less revenue and still contribute a larger percentage of each sales dollar toward the costs of running the property. Coffee makes the idea intuitive. A cup has coffee, a cup, a lid, condiments, and waste. Those direct inputs can be modest relative to the selling price. But then come labor, electricity, cleaning, equipment, store occupancy, and the 24/7 operating environment. So the correct conclusion is not that coffee is pure profit. It is that a $4 transaction can have a completely different gross profit structure from a $500 fuel transaction. The distinction becomes even more important because inside sales can depend on conversion rather than traffic alone. A truck can buy fuel and immediately leave. Another truck can fuel, park, buy dinner, return for coffee in the morning, and pick up supplies before departure. The fuel volume may look identical. The economic value of the two visits is not. Prepared food adds another layer, and ownership matters. The travel center operator might run the food program directly. It might operate a franchise. It might lease space to another company. Those structures produce different revenue, labor, and risk. Pilot's March 2026 disclosure makes that distinction concrete. The company said nearly 350 owned and operated quick-service restaurant franchise locations were open 24 hours a day, while it was also rolling proprietary food concepts through hundreds of travel centers. That is not an accidental side business. Food is being deliberately integrated into the travel center system. But as potential owners, we cannot look at a restaurant sign and automatically count every dollar of its sales as ours. We have to know the contract. Maybe we own the restaurant operation and collect the revenue while paying labor and food cost. Maybe we collect rent. Maybe we receive franchise economics. Maybe a third party does most of the operating work. The same question applies to truck repair, a hotel pad, a truck wash, or another service sitting beside the main building. A property can look vertically integrated while the economics are actually divided among several operators. This is why the business cannot be explained with a list of revenue streams. We need to know how each stream behaves. Fuel may create traffic. Food may create gross margin. But food only matters if the driver comes through the door, and the driver only comes through the door if the property is useful enough to earn the stop. A shower is one of the stranger pieces of this business because it can earn value in two places at once. First, it is a service. The room needs water, hot water, towels, laundry, ventilation, plumbing, cleaning labor, maintenance, and turnaround time. A shower room that is dirty or unavailable is not inventory we can sell. Second, it can be a loyalty instrument. Love's documented this mechanism clearly in a 2024 driver promotion. Its rewards program offered free showers after a qualifying commercial diesel fill of 50 gallons or more. The important part is not whether that exact promotion is unchanged today. The important part is the business logic. Why would an operator give away a shower after selling fuel? Because the shower can influence where the next fuel purchase happens. If a driver knows that fueling within one network produces something useful later, the reward can make the network more valuable than a one-time discount at an isolated station. The shower P&L might show water, laundry, and cleaning cost. The economic benefit may partly appear somewhere else, in repeat fuel volume and customer retention. That makes the service harder to judge in isolation. It also creates a management problem. If we cut cleaning labor to make the shower department look more profitable, we may damage the very loyalty the service was supposed to create. A room can be financially cheap and commercially expensive if drivers stop trusting its cleanliness. And capacity still matters. If 10 drivers want showers and the rooms are occupied or waiting to be cleaned, loyalty value turns into frustration. This is a tiny hotel operation with very short stays and no beds. The objective is not overnight occupancy. It is fast reset, clean service, and a driver who chooses to come back. Then we reach the part of the property that looks least like a product: parking. A truck parking space earns nothing when we think about it like a painted rectangle. But that rectangle consumes land, paving, drainage, lighting, snow removal in cold climates, cleaning, security, insurance, and maintenance. And at the right time of night, it becomes scarce. The latest National Jason's Law survey update we found from FHWA used 2019 data. It identified roughly 313,000 truck parking spaces nationally, about 40,000 at public rest areas, and about 273,000 at private truck stops. A 2024 FHWA Truck Parking Handbook, summarizing that same national survey, reported that more than 90% of surveyed drivers described parking as difficult between 7 in the evening and midnight, and more than 60% reported difficulty between midnight and 5 in the morning. Those are dated survey results, not a live 2026 count, but they make the time of day problem clear. Now we need to handle federal hours of service rules carefully. For a standard property-carrying driver, FMCSA generally allows up to 11 hours of driving after 10 consecutive hours off duty, and driving cannot continue beyond the 14th consecutive hour after coming on duty under the normal rule. That does not mean federal law forces a driver to visit our truck stop. The law does not require the driver to buy our fuel, use our parking, eat our food, or choose a private truck stop at all. What the rule changes is the value of time and legal stopping capacity. A driver approaching the end of the available driving window cannot treat parking as an optional errand forever. Somewhere the truck has to stop. That creates urgency around location, availability, and predictability. It also changes the cost of searching. If a driver arrives at a full lot late in the available driving window, the next option is not simply another coffee shop 10 minutes away. The driver may need to spend scarce legal driving time hunting for a safe alternative. That makes reliable parking information and predictable capacity economically valuable, even when the parking price itself is zero. So why would an owner give parking away? FHWA's 2019 operator survey provides a useful clue. 75% of responding truck stop operators said they did not charge for parking. 18% charged only for a small reserved portion. A smaller group described waiving fees when drivers purchased food or amenities. Free parking can therefore behave like customer acquisition. The driver arrives for a space and remains on the property long enough to eat, shower, shop, and perhaps fuel in the morning. But the owner should not ask only whether a space is occupied. We should ask what kind of visit the space supports. A driver who parks for a legal rest period after buying fuel and dinner may create valuable dwell. A driver who occupies a space for an entire day without spending on the property creates very different economics. A short-stay truck using a space while eating may turn the capacity more than once. Overnight parking creates fewer turns, but potentially more service opportunities. That means the useful metric is not simply parking occupancy, it is economic contribution per occupied space over time. Paid or reserved parking can convert scarcity directly into revenue, but it is not pure profit. The space still consumes land and capital, and charging for it can make the next exit more attractive. There is also a strategic choice about how many spaces to reserve. Too few, and we leave direct revenue on the table during peak demand. Too many, and the lot can appear unavailable or unfriendly to drivers who have not prepaid. Pricing solves one problem while potentially creating another. This is why current operator behavior matters. Love said it planned to add another 1,500 truck parking spaces in 2026, bringing its network above 52,000 by year-end, while describing those spaces as part of its support for professional drivers. If asphalt were merely a cost, operators would not keep investing in it. The better interpretation is that parking is infrastructure that helps the rest of the property work. It creates dwell. Dwell creates opportunities to solve more problems, and every problem solved can become another reason to choose the same exit again. Some of those problems belong to the driver, others belong to the truck. A commercial vehicle with a damaged tire, an oil problem, or a minor mechanical issue has a different sense of urgency from a consumer deciding whether to postpone an oil change. A truck that is not moving may not be earning. That makes maintenance valuable because the real product is reduced downtime. A repair bay therefore competes on more than price. The fleet also cares about whether the work can be done where the truck already planned to stop, whether parts are available, and whether the driver can combine the repair with food, fuel, and rest rather than losing another trip to another facility. The same logic applies to a certified scale. A driver does not really buy weight. The driver buys information before a potential compliance problem. CAT scale shows how one of these services can sit inside the property without being fully owned by the travel center. The company says that for qualifying host locations, it provides the scale equipment, maintenance, and staff training with no startup cost to the truck stop or convenience store. Its current customer-facing FAQ lists a first way at $15.25, but we do not know from the public material how that fee is divided with the host location. So in our financial model, we will not pretend the entire scale ticket is our revenue. That decision is important. A rigorous P&L should sometimes contain a zero, where a weaker analysis would invent a number. If the revenue-sharing contract is unknown, the honest model does not quietly assume that every customer dollar belongs to us. Now imagine one representative visit. The point is not that those percentages are universal. They are assumptions placed in the open. The point is, what happens when we think in contribution instead of receipts? The fuel sale can be more than $500. While three much smaller transactions together contribute more gross profit before property-level operating costs. And even that is not the final answer. The paid parking space needs pavement, the food counter needs labor, the store needs electricity, the shower credit consumes water and cleaning. Gross profit is only the amount available to begin paying for the property-level machine. That is why one customer can have several wallets. The fleet pays for energy. The driver pays for convenience. The truck creates maintenance demand. The legal system creates a need for weight compliance and rest. The property sits in the middle and tries to reduce the time between all of those needs appearing and the truck moving again. This integrated model has a problem. It never really sleeps. A serious travel center can need cashiers, cleaners, food workers, managers, maintenance staff, technicians, and security coverage across nights, weekends, and holidays. Refrigeration runs while the driver sleeps. Exterior lights illuminate acres of pavement. Water heaters serve showers. Pumps, payment systems, and point-of-sale systems have to work when the next truck arrives at 3 in the morning. And the property is located where freight needs it, not necessarily where labor is easiest to recruit. That creates a distinctive operating trade-off. The best freight corridor might run through a place with limited labor supply. A site can have excellent demand and still struggle to staff the kitchen, clean showers quickly, or keep repair bays productive. One labor shortage can therefore spill into several revenue streams at once. Fewer cleaners can reduce shower capacity. Fewer food workers can shorten the menu or slow service. Fewer technicians can turn expensive repair bays into idle capital. A manager looking only at payroll might call the schedule expensive. A manager looking at lost throughput might call the same schedule necessary. Then there is pavement. A parking lot full of passenger cars is one thing. A truck lot repeatedly carrying loaded tractor trailers is a heavy industrial surface pretending to be retail real estate. Every visit that creates revenue also adds wear to one of the most expensive pieces of the site. That creates a strange owner-level tension. We want traffic because traffic creates gross profit. But traffic is also physically consuming the asset that creates the gross profit. That is why the accounting word EBITDA can mislead an owner if we stop there. A pump eventually needs replacement. Pavement eventually needs rehabilitation. Refrigeration, HVAC, roofs, kitchen equipment, and shower rooms wear out. Underground systems need monitoring and maintenance. A property can show a healthy operating result while quietly accumulating a capital bill. Current operators provide a scale clue. Love said it planned to invest $700 million in 2026 across new locations and major updates. Berkshire has also described increased capital spending at Pilot for modernization and EV charging expansion. Those are network numbers, not our maintenance budget. But they demonstrate that this is not a business where the physical asset can be built once and then ignored. For our model, we will separate routine operating expense from normalized maintenance capital. Routine repairs belong in the annual cost of operating the site. Replacing a major section of pavement or a large piece of equipment is different. If we ignore that recurring capital simply because it does not arrive in equal monthly installments, we overstate what the owner can take home. That distinction is the difference between asking what the property earned this year and asking what the owner can sustainably take out without allowing the property to deteriorate. Now look underneath the land. Fuel storage creates one of the most asymmetric risks in the investment. The Environmental Protection Agency requires regulated underground storage tank systems to use release detection. Federal rules also impose financial responsibility requirements on petroleum UST owners and operators for corrective action and certain third-party injury and property damage claims from accidental releases. The details can vary with the system and with state implementation, which is exactly why we should avoid the lazy claim that every leak costs one fixed amount or that liability is identical in every deal. For a buyer, the correct response is due diligence. Tank age, release detection records, environmental history, Phase 1 assessment, Phase 2 work if warranted, previous spills, piping, monitoring, insurance, state requirements. The land can be the moat and the liability at the same time. This matters because the buyer cannot easily separate the operating company from the physical history of the site. A strong location might have decades of fuel operations beneath it. The more attractive the parcel is, the more dangerous it can be to assume that the visible store tells us everything we need to know. Fuel creates a second balance sheet issue above ground: working capital. When diesel becomes more expensive, the operator needs more cash to buy the same physical quantity of product. Revenue may rise because the commodity price rose, but that does not mean economics improved. Think about the cash cycle. We pay to put fuel into storage. The customer buys it. Fleets may settle under commercial arrangements. The next delivery arrives. If the cost of replenishing the tanks rises faster than the cash available to fund inventory, the business can feel pressure even while the pumps stay busy. This is why liquidity belongs in the investment thesis. A site can be profitable on paper and still need enough financial capacity to carry inventory, payroll, maintenance, and debt through volatile periods. Flying J provides a historical warning about confusing essential demand with financial safety. The company filed for Chapter 11 in December 2008. Contemporary reporting quoted Flying J describing a liquidity crisis associated with falling oil prices and tight credit markets, while the business intended to keep operating. The trucks did not vanish from America's highways. The problem was financial structure and liquidity. By 2010, Flying J's confirmed reorganization involved refinancing, asset sales, and the combination of its retail operations with Pilot. Contemporary industry reporting said the plan provided for full repayment of roughly $1.4 billion owed to creditors. We should not turn that into a simple morality tale about fuel prices. Flying J was a complex energy business, not just a collection of truck stop stores. The narrower lesson is enough. Persistent customer demand does not protect a capital-intensive business from running out of financial flexibility. If we borrow too much to buy our site, carry too much working capital pressure, and then discover an environmental or maintenance problem, a full parking lot does not automatically save us. So now we finally have enough pieces to open our own books. We are going to build one representative truck stop, not an average truck stop, a transparent model. We will calibrate the physical layout to public examples and the operating mechanics to historical public company data, then make every unsupported input explicit. Start with revenue. At 10 million aggregate fuel gallons and our purely modeled blended fuel price, fuel revenue is $52 million. In the hidden model, we split that top line between diesel and gasoline only to make the P&L readable. We are not claiming that the mix represents a national average. The same is true for the $10 million of non-fuel sales, which we divide among DEF, the store, prepared food, restaurant-type rent, showers, parking, truck care, and other revenue. The purpose of the breakout is not precision theater. It is to force ourselves to ask who owns each activity and where the money actually appears. If a restaurant is leased, we should not count the restaurant's full sales. If Catscale's host share is not public, we should not pretend the full way fee belongs to us. If truck care is operator-owned in our model, then we must also carry the labor and operating complexity that comes with owning it. Add everything and total modeled revenue is $62 million. That number looks fantastic. Now remove the illusion. At 18 cents of modeled fuel gross margin per gallon, 10 million gallons produce only $1.8 million of fuel gross profit. At a modeled 60% blended non-fuel gross margin, $10 million of non-fuel sales produce $6 million of non-fuel gross profit. Total gross profit is $7.8 million. So more than 80% of our modeled revenue disappears before we even discuss the cost of running the site. This is the first place where the giant diesel receipt loses its psychological power. $52 million of modeled fuel revenue contributes $1.8 million of fuel gross profit in this scenario. $10 million of non-fuel revenue contributes $6 million of gross profit. Again, those are assumptions, not industry averages, but the mechanics are the point. Revenue mix and margin mix are two different maps of the same business. Now subtract $4.5 million of modeled site operating expense. The biggest line is labor and payroll burden. Then come utilities, routine repairs, payment system costs, cleaning, insurance, property tax, technology, security, waste, and the other costs required to keep this roadside campus functioning. We are left with $3.3 million of EBITDA-like operating result. That is where many business videos would stop. We cannot. For accounting purposes, our model also assumes $1.2 million of depreciation and amortization. Subtract that, and the accounting result before interest falls to about $2.1 million. The first year's approximate interest on our illustrative debt is a little over $812,000, leaving modeled pre-tax accounting income of about $1.29 million. We are not going to invent an income tax rate because the tax result depends on ownership structure, jurisdiction, and the buyer. We leave tax outside the model instead of creating false precision. But depreciation is not a cash reserve that magically repaves the lot. So for owner cash, we return to the $3.3 million of EBITDA-like operating result and subtract $900,000 of normalized maintenance capital for the physical asset. Now the property produces roughly $2.4 million of pre-financing, pre-income tax owner operating cash. Against $26.5 million of modeled invested capital, that is a little over 9% before financing and income taxes. Now add debt. With our illustrative financing structure, annual principal and interest payments are about $1.13 million. In the first year, our rough split is about $812,000 of interest and about $322,000 of principal. After normalized maintenance capital and the full debt payment, the base site leaves approximately $1.27 million before income taxes. With roughly $14 million of modeled equity and working capital tied up, that is around a 9% pre-tax cash yield on the equity in this illustration. Notice what happened. We began with $62 million of revenue. We ended with roughly $1.27 million of pre-tax cash after maintenance capital and debt service. That does not mean the business is bad. It means the top line is almost useless as a shortcut to the owner's return. A buyer who hears $62 million of revenue and stops thinking is not underwriting a truck stop. The buyer is admiring the size of the fuel invoices, and one assumption can change the verdict immediately. If we paid $35 million instead of $25 million for the same operating business, while keeping working capital at $1.5 million, the $2.4 million of pre-financing cash would represent only about 6.5% on the total capital before income taxes. Nothing operational changed. The pumps did not slow down. The coffee did not get worse. The parking lot did not become emptier. We simply paid more for the same cash-producing machine. Same trucks, same coffee, same parking lot, different investment. This is why a busy property can still be a bad purchase. Now we stress the model. The weak site can still process tens of millions of dollars of revenue. It can still look busy from the highway. It can still fail to support the capital structure. This is not a scenario where no customers arrive. It is more dangerous than that. Customers arrive, gallons move, employees work, and the property looks alive. But lower fuel spread, weaker inside conversion, and a fixed operating base leave too little gross profit to support maintenance and debt. That is the type of business that can fool an owner for a long time because the activity feels like success. Now, the base case we just built produces roughly $2.4 million before financing and about $1.27 million after our illustrative debt service. It works, but it does not leave enormous room for mistakes. An unexpected pavement project, a weaker margin period, or a staffing problem can matter. Then, the strong case. That is a radically different investment. The strong site spends more money operating and maintaining the property, but it earns enough additional gross profit to more than compensate. Volume, fuel spread, non-fuel conversion, and operating discipline reinforce one another. That is what operating leverage looks like here. Some costs rise with activity, but a large portion of the physical site exists whether the 200th truck arrives tonight or not. Once enough profitable visits pass through the property, incremental gross profit can improve the owner outcome quickly. The reverse is also true. When profitable visits fall below the level required to support the fixed machine, cash deteriorates quickly. Now, let us make the break-even concept easier to see. Suppose our base site handles 400 truck visit equivalents per day. That is a modeling device, not an observed national average. If we allocate the modeled $7.8 million of annual gross profit across those visits, we get about $53 of gross profit per truck visit equivalent. Our modeled site operating expense, normalized maintenance capital, and debt service together are about $6.53 million per year. At roughly $53 of gross profit per visit, the property needs about 335 truck visit equivalents per day to cover that combined burden in this simplified model. The exact number is not the lesson. The useful idea is gross profit per visit. Gallons tell us how much fuel moved. Gross profit per visit asks how well the entire property converted traffic into economic contribution. One site might sell more gallons by discounting aggressively and still earn less per visit. Another might sell the same gallons but capture more food, retail, and service demand. A third might have strong inside spending but an acquisition price so high that the return on capital remains mediocre. This metric is more useful than gallons alone because it forces us to care about what happens after fueling. Consider two sites selling the same 10 million gallons. The gallons are identical. The owner outcome is not. Site B does a better job converting dwell into food, retail, and services, even after carrying a larger operating cost base. Why might that happen? Maybe Site B has parking when Site A is full. Maybe drivers trust its showers. Maybe its food program converts more visits. Maybe its truck care bays reduce downtime. Maybe the store is positioned so a driver naturally walks through it on the way from the lot. Maybe the site is simply managed better. None of those improvements have to change the number of gallons sold to change the investment result. And then purchase price sits above everything. A brilliant operator can still earn a mediocre return if the property was bought at a price that capitalizes perfection. A merely decent operator can earn an attractive return from an excellent site purchased at a disciplined price. This is the central operating insight. The truck stop does not win by maximizing one revenue stream. It wins when the pieces make each other more valuable. Fuel creates traffic. Parking creates dwell. Food and retail monetize the person. Service monetizes the machine. Showers can create loyalty. Fleet relationships can create repeat volume. The exit makes all of it possible. And the purchase price determines whether that operating success becomes a good investment for us. This helps explain why the national networks matter. Berkshire Hathaway completed the purchase of the remaining interest in Pilot in January 2024, making Pilot wholly owned by Berkshire. Pilot's own March 2026 disclosure says the company operates more than 900 locations and supplies about 12 billion gallons of fuel per year. Travel Centers of America followed a different ownership path. BP agreed to acquire TA for $86 per share, about $1.3 billion of equity value, and the transaction closed in May 2023. TA had said in 2024 that its network exceeded 300 locations in 44 states. Those networks can offer fleet coverage, purchasing scale, loyalty systems, payment infrastructure, data, and access to capital that an individual operator cannot easily reproduce. A network also has a portfolio advantage. One weak location does not automatically define the company. Capital can be allocated across many sites. A loyalty program can work across states. Fleet relationships can generate volume across thousands of miles instead of at one exit. An independent site has a different set of potential strengths. The owner can make local decisions quickly. Food can be distinctive. Service can become personal. A parcel acquired decades ago can carry a cost basis that a new entrant cannot replicate. But network scale does not repeal the accounting we just did. Berkshire's second quarter 2026 report gives a remarkably clean example. Pilot's quarterly revenue increased by about 48% from a year earlier, primarily because fuel prices were higher, even though fuel volumes were slightly lower. The revenue number became much larger while the physical volume moved the other way. And the earnings story depended on the period you looked at. Pilot's second quarter pre-tax earnings were $290 million, up from $119 million a year earlier. But for the first 6 months of 2026, pre-tax earnings were $240 million, down from $287 million in the first half of 2025. Revenue, volume, and profit are 3 different measurements. That is true for a giant Berkshire subsidiary, and it is true for our one-modeled truck stop. Scale can make the network more useful. It can strengthen fleet relationships. It can spread technology and loyalty costs. It can give the operator more ways to deploy capital. But a large network is still made of physical locations where pumps break, pavement wears out, employees need to be scheduled, and customers decide whether the next exit is easier. This is why we should not say BP bought TA for the parking lots, or that Berkshire bought Pilot because fuel retail is somehow guaranteed to be recession-proof. The strategic value is broader. These companies control large networks of roadside sites where vehicles already stop for energy, food, rest, and services. That physical position may matter even if the energy product changes. The final risk is that diesel itself may not always dominate the same way. The Federal National Zero-Emission Freight Corridor Strategy lays out a phased approach for medium and heavy-duty zero-emission infrastructure, beginning with priority freight hubs and gradually connecting corridors through the next decade and beyond. That does not tell us which technology wins. It tells us that the infrastructure question is real. High-power charging for heavy trucks can require hundreds of kilowatts per connector and, at multi-truck sites, multi-megawatt electrical capacity. That can mean new utility interconnections, transformers, charging equipment, and decisions about how much valuable land to dedicate to a system whose utilization may take time to mature. Longer charging dwell sounds attractive if we sell food and services, but longer dwell is not free money. If the charging equipment is expensive, if demand charges are painful, if utilization is low, or if fleets charge primarily at their own depots, the extra time on our property does not automatically produce an attractive return. The same owner discipline applies. Do not ask whether the new technology is exciting. Ask how much capital the site must spend, what utilization it can realistically achieve, what gross profit the energy sale and added dwell create, and how long the equipment has to operate before the return becomes attractive. The owner question remains the same as it was with diesel. How much capital do we invest? How much gross profit does each visit create? And how reliably can the property produce cash after maintaining the asset? That brings us back to the land. The fuel product can change. Payment systems can change. Truck powertrains can change. But long-haul freight still has a physical problem. Vehicles and people need strategically located places to stop, take on energy, rest, eat, maintain equipment, and return to the route. That is why the strongest part of a good truck stop may be the integrated position rather than any one pump, coffee machine, or parking space. Now return to our truck from the beginning. It bought an illustrative 100 gallons of diesel and produced a receipt of roughly $545 at our current national price benchmark. That was the largest receipt of the visit, but the receipt was not the business. The business started with the exit that made the stop convenient. The fuel contract helped bring the truck onto the property. The parking space gave the driver somewhere legal and useful to remain. Food and retail served the person. A shower could strengthen loyalty. Repair and weighing services could reduce downtime and uncertainty for the machine. Then all of those gross profit opportunities had to pay for 24/7 labor, utilities, security, the land, the pavement, the tanks, maintenance capital, and the financing used to own the site. Our base model produced a respectable return. Our weak model lost cash. Our strong model produced an excellent return. All three could have a bright sign, a busy lot, and enormous fuel revenue. That is what makes the category deceptive. A full parking lot is evidence of demand, not proof of investor returns. A huge fuel top line is evidence of product flow, not proof of profit. A high gross margin inside the store is useful, but only after the property earns enough visits to cover the fixed machine around it. So is owning a truck stop a good investment? Only if the location generates enough gross profit per visit to justify the physical asset beneath it and the price we paid for that asset. A great truck stop is not simply a diesel retailer with high-margin snacks attached. It is a system that monetizes the interval between the moment a truck has to stop and the moment it can economically move again. The fuel fills the tank. The business sells continuity. The business sells the next mile.